Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Back with the beautiful Liezel Lane, myteenlifecoach.com. That's what she's all about. Her and her team of coaches helping those in need, families and teens, especially going through the trials and triumphs of being a teen. Welcome back today. How are you?
Hi, Jill. It's good to see you this week.
You too, sweetheart. Please say hello to our listeners today. We're live on the Zoomcast and podcast, so that's why I could see her, call her beautiful. I'm actually seeing her face to face. Tell us a little about your work and what you do.
Yeah. So every Wednesday, I get to beat the most magnificent Jill Nicolini. By the way, in the background are my very loud birds. So if they do make a noise, just ignore them.
Okay, I didn't know we had birds. This is so cool.
Yeah. So we're part of myteenlifecoach.com. We are professional teen coaches, teen life coaches. So what we do is we're actually using research-based and evidence-based strategies to help parents and the teenagers themselves and young adults really just try to navigate through some really difficult things while they're going through this. I was watching our podcast from last week, and I really liked the metaphor I used about trying to breathe underwater, because that's, I think, what going through teenage years feels like.
Yep.
And then, you know, like you said, it kind of goes to the next phase. But this is all about skill building. It's all about building the resilience and being able to learn what is going to put you in good stead going forward. And although it is, I always think of a lotus flower. The story about the lotus flower is that it grows out through mud, right? And then it becomes this gorgeous flower. So that pushing through the mud part is really important. And that's what the teenagers are about. So we're just here to help navigate through all of that.
Beautiful. And there's a lot of navigation indeed that must be done. You being the mom of teenagers, I'm not there yet. I'm dealing with my trials and tribulations of the 5 and 7-year-old phase, but I know I'm going to get there coming before I know it. So any advice from you, clearly. And yeah, there's a lot to talk about. Any updates, any of your clients you want to share to start?
Yeah, so the topic that came up this week for me was a parent who had called me and said, "Why do I have a pessimistic teenager? What is up with being a pessimist?" And that was very real, because even though teenagers are, you know, like I said, trying to grow through the mud and trying to figure out who they are, what they are, and they've got all these hormones and things, there is a perception that, you know, teenagers are always negative or pessimistic, or, you know, there's never anything positive or good to say, or there's an attitude. But pessimism is a real thing. And I wanted to share a little bit about that because there's some interesting science and statistics around this. And it's really good for us to be aware that although it is there and although it exists, there are ways for us to navigate through this. So my topic, I guess, for today is like talking about the pessimistic teen, right? So here's a fun fact. The fun fact is that optimism and pessimism is 50% born. So it is genetically
like within. That's what I was going to say. Exactly. Interesting.
It is genetically within you around 50%.
Okay.
So that means that 50% of us ourselves don't have a choice in whether we're naturally optimistic or pessimistic people. Now, the other 50% is based on environment and how we live our lives and what comes along our road. So as behavioral professionals, obviously, there's only so much you can do when it comes to genetics. But what we can work with is what the environment does and how it influences us. So the story is always, you know, parents saying, "Why is she always, you know, half glass empty? Why is it always negative Nelly or Debbie Downer?" Right?
Negative Nancy, Debbie Downer. I love. Do you remember that character? Did you ever watch Saturday Night Live?
I did not.
I used to call my mom. Okay, after the show, do me a favor, Google on YouTube or whatever. YouTube, Debbie Downer, Saturday Night Live. The character reminded me of my mom. It's just everything was negative. Oh, and this, and you can't eat the turkey. It's like a Thanksgiving scene. Oh, it's got cancer, and the like everything. It's just so fun. Watch 1 or 2 clips of it. It is just funny. It's going to make you realize I should never be so negative. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I will totally do that. And
Thank you.
so the thing is, it's about introducing the concept of learned helplessness. So way back when they did science on animals, and it was, really bad and cruel, which I don't want to even like talk about. But what they learned through that research was that when individuals or people or even animals at that point in time have repeated exposure to stressors that are completely outside of their control, it becomes a form of learned helplessness, which means that they are unable to use any control options to influence their environment.
Yeah.
Okay, so for example, problem solving. When there is a form of learned helplessness, when you are completely exposed to these stressors and there's absolutely no way out, there's going to be this, well, there's nothing I can do about it anyway kind of feeling, right?
Yeah.
So what happened in those research studies was that in the absence of finding your way out, in the absence of being able to get control over your environment, those subjects lost motivation, right? They lost their desire for learning. They had increased sadness and feelings of hopelessness. Obviously, anxiety and frustration would increase. And the ultimate downfall was the lack of self-esteem. And when there's no self-esteem, you just drop down and fall into a ball, right? So there's nothing to look forward to. And so in teenagers, it kind of looks like this. My day was bad as usual. Or why does it even matter? We're all going to die
Negative,
anyway,
depressing. Yeah. Yeah.
right? What's
Yeah.
the use?
Mm-hmm.
Why should I even bother? I'm not going to pass anyway, right?
True.
And so now think about this from an environment perspective. So you have to take into consideration family dynamics. You have to take into consideration they might be going through a divorce, or they were major life events or things like that. So that's that other 50%. And it's very, very frustrating for parents, because if you're a parent who is on the 50% optimist side, it's very hard for you to sit with that student and be like, well, there's a positive side to this, or it's not going to always be like this, or it's going to be, okay, tomorrow is another day, right? It's just it's very hard to understand and empathize and feel and feel a sense of what can I do to help turn the way this child is thinking around. Okay, so this is why you reach out to a teen life coach, because there are certain things that we do. So I have this amazing book. I want to actually tell you about it. It's called Learned Optimism. It is by this Dr. Martin Seligman, and he is the father and the leader of this thing called Learned Optimism. Okay,
Yep.
so his question was, can optimism be learned?
Yeah.
And through the research and through our practices now, it became evident that if there are three questions that the patient or the client will say yes to, then yes, in this particular case, optimism can be learned. So the first question that they will typically ask is, they'll ask the client, or they will ask themselves, do I get discouraged easily? Okay, so that person will ask themselves that question, do I get discouraged easily? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. The next question is, do I get depressed more than I want to? That's the key. More than I want to.
Yeah.
Meaning that there's another side to this. Then that's the second question. And the third question is, do I fail more than I think I should? Okay, so when a client says yes to those three things, then a person like me and life coaches and professionals will say, okay, we can now start with trying to work on a strategy of learning how to be more optimistic.
Yeah.
So the thing I wanted to also share is that there is a place for optimism and pessimism, though. that both are equally important. Because if you think about a teenager who just was drinking and now there's this drinking and driving and they're like, oh, I'll be fine. That's not good. That's not
Yeah.
helpful, right? So,
Yeah.
and then at the same time, if you've got a person who is, down an alleyway and something comes up and you're about to get attacked, it is appropriate to be pessimistic, right?
Yeah.
So there are places and there is space for both of these things, but what we're trying to do here is balance that out, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing that we do is we'll obviously do tests and assessments. So we look at personality, we take our clients through different inventories and things like that. And then we also have a deep conversation about, what is your daily lifestyle like, right? So who do you surround yourself with? All the stuff you and I
Yeah.
spoke about before, the social friends, the energy or the vibe around school, what's home feel like. Mental health is important because, if your child is suffering from anxiety already or depression, or
Yeah.
ADHD stuff, all of that does play a role. And then of course, so does physical health, right? So
Yeah.
if you have a teenager who has cancer, for example, that's absolutely going to
True.
play a role in everything. So getting perspective and getting a feel for those kinds of things is really important. And then we introduce this thing called the ABC. So, and I'll kind of go through an example with you. So we'll talk about the first thing, the adversity. Okay, so the adversity is I suck at school. I can never pass this test. All right. And we talk about those adversities. So another example might be my friend. This is a very common one. My best friend never returns my text messages. So in a normal day-to-day setting, it's like, no big deal, right?
But
Leave it alone. But that pessimistic thing then starts to move into B, which is the belief system around that adversity. So now the belief system is, well, they obviously don't care for me anymore. They don't like me anymore. I'm not important enough for them, right? So there's a bought-in belief that happens as a result of the adversity. So that's your B. Then we talk about the consequence. So it's what happens after you have that belief. So, oh, well, I suppose I'm just going to be miserable the whole rest of the day. I'm going to stew over it I just stewed over it all day. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't go out or do anything because all I could do was think about how I didn't matter to this friend, right?
yeah.
So the ABC is, and we go through this, what's the adversity? What did you believe about the adversity? And what did you end up doing? Like how do you deal with those things, right? So that, now when you look at a naturally optimistic person, would have a whole different feel to it, right? Like, oh, well, they're just busy, or maybe something came up, no problem. And their consequence would be just go upon life and do your thing, right? So there are very significant differences there. And it does not make that teenager a loser. It does not make that teenager, it's just, we are all different. And I get passionate, I should say, when kids are judged based on what their natural tendencies are, right? So once we have found awareness around what's happening with this teenager, they start to become aware of, oh, this is how I think about these things. And awareness, like is 80% of the battle, right? Once you become aware, you can't unsee that anymore. Now the skill building starts. Now the actual building them up towards that self-esteem starts to become relevant. So the ABC part is the I'm not in control feeling, right? That learned helplessness feeling, that feeling of I don't feel like I'm in control of stuff. What we do now is we use a thing called distraction. So we've got ABC, here comes D in the alphabet, distraction. So we learn the skill of stopping and just saying stop. So I'm just going to be miserable for the rest of today. Stop. You're distracting that action, you're distracting that thought. So that takes practice, right? So it's, I had a crappy day. I always have a crappy day. Stop. I'm gonna just stop that thought. Just stop it. Don't judge it. Don't do anything with it. Just say stop. So that's the distraction. And then we introduce E, which is, well, actually before that is we dispute that. So I teach my clients how to argue with themselves. Okay, so the dispute will look something like, well, is this true? Is it true that my best friend doesn't like me anymore? Or is it a story?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, what's true, what's story? Well, there's no facts. Okay, there's no facts. So then it must be a story. So we learn different things to help that teenager challenge their own belief system, their own thought patterns. So is it true or is it story? Well, no, this is clearly story. There's no facts to back this up with. Then what we do is we create a distance to it. So a distance would look something like, think of an example. It's just a belief.
It's just, okay.
It's just a belief. It's just a story. It's just a story I've told myself. So now I've had that thought, but now I'm going to distance myself from it because now I truly believe that there are no facts to back this up.
Yeah.
So I distance myself by calling it out as, well, that was just a belief, or that was a misconception, or that was a story, right? You call it out. Then what we do is we use the word energize, and that's the E. So there's basically 3 D's in that formula, and then we go to E. Okay. And E is to energize around that. So the energize around it is to get perspective, right? So this is where we start to introduce that learned optimism. Well, what would a different perspective look like? Well, maybe something came up. Oh, well, the optimist would have already thought of that, like 5 steps back, right? But now we're learning a skill of, oh, well, maybe something did come up. Oh, okay. Yeah. So now you get a new loop of thoughts that are happening. Okay. And this is, I know that it sounds so basic, and I know that it sounds so obvious, Jill, but it is so not obvious because teenagers are in their feelings. They are in their thoughts. They are in it. They're under that cloud all the time. Yeah. So to help them distance and distract from those self-defeating thoughts and behaviors, and to help them distance from it, and then I'm make up a word, perspectivize, right? Reperspectivize around those things. So one of the things that I'll do, for example, to help them get a different perspective is I'll ask them to think about modeling. So do you know somebody in your life who would have done this differently? Or have you ever noticed that somebody else would have taken this situation differently? And I have them learn how to observe other people's behaviors or model what other friends would have done differently. So starting to get curious. And curiosity is, I call it the vaccination against sabotage, right? If you can become curious about how other things are happening around you, you have a better chance of canceling out your own self-sabotage. So then when you, for example, mirror somebody, so maybe there's a kid who is more of an optimist, and I would challenge them to mirror something that they have done, or learning by observation, right? So just becoming aware that it's not all in here. You can also learn and observe from out there. And then we take them through this tiered mastery process. So it is, it's not just about like A, B, C, D, E, here we go, done. I'm now learning, I've learned how to be an optimist, right? It starts with the tiniest things. It starts with, on a typical morning, I did not get dressed on time for school and I didn't make it to the bus. I'm a failure, right? The tiered mastery on that is, okay, so what if you laid your clothes out the night before and you would have taken them through that process, and then they would start to do something. Their perspective would be, okay, I'll lay my clothes out differently the night before. That's one tiny, tiny little action, but it has the potential to completely switch over how they perceive their day and how they start their day and how they move forward through their day. So the pessimism starts to become something you can become aware of, have emotional intelligence about, and start to get mastery over. And that's not to say you can fight that 50% of the genetic side, but now you have two sides of the coin, because the opposite is true as well. When somebody is overly optimistic, they can almost deem to be naive or too much, Pollyanna is on the other side of that, right? So then being unrealistic or being overly ambitious, those are the things that happen there. So that the reverse is true as well. And what we're striving for is balance. So, so now you think about a kid who can have control over their own thought process around how they're perceiving something. They now have control over their environment. They now have control over what they have power over. And that's when their self-esteem starts to come up. So now you go back to those horrible experiments that happened in the olden days. And what happens there is they don't just fall down into a ball and be like, it's going to be like this forever. They actually start to take control over what their thought processes are, and they can start to do better. So it is, for me, the most satisfying part of my work is when I can see that a teenager has successfully learned how to control their thought processes over things that are destructive to them.
Nice.
So bottom line is, optimism can be learned. Bottom line is that it is 50% of who we are. And we all are just trying to strive towards that balance. So is there such a thing as a pessimistic teen? Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
But they are, in an opportunity place where they can have tremendous amount of personal power. So, yeah. So this book by Martin Seligman, Learned Optimism, it's extremely well done and written.
Who's the author?
Seligman, Martin Seligman.
Okay.
Yeah. And we use this in our practice. We teach this. We teach this at the Youth Coaching Institute. He is extremely good at what he does. So yeah, he's one of our thought leaders in the business.
Beautiful. I know you've mentioned him before, but I couldn't see it. I'm like trying to read because the
Yeah.
light's so dim.
Yeah.
Aw. Well, yeah, another great show. You always have a lot of information to give us and advice. Look, we got teenagers home for the holidays, right? Next week, you got Thanksgiving, you got Christmas coming around. Things probably get a little tricky at the household, right? With the dynamic of having the kids home. Any advice to anyone out there?
Right. You're absolutely right, because next week, I'm actually going to talk about the science of gratitude, since it is the week before Thanksgiving.
I won't be here next week. I'm gone. Maybe they're doing, I don't know if we're canceled or you just with someone else, but yeah, I'm going. I mean, the boys are going to Nashville, but.
Oh, nice. That's fantastic. You must enjoy that.
I will. Well,
even whether you do it this week or next week, whichever, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, the science of gratitude is what will come up next time. So
perfect. All right. That's important. And unless you do it with someone else, which is fine. And again, myteenlifecoach.com. Liezel Lane, how else can we get in touch with you?
You can call or text us at 770-235-8202. You can go to www.myteenlifecoach.com. You can look up my name, Liezel Lane, on LinkedIn. And if you just type in teen coaching or teen life coaching into Google, you'll see all of our social media.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure to have you here. You have a fantastic day and a great Thanksgiving if we're probably not going to speak. And we'll talk and hopefully we'll get out all that extra food out of our body by the week we get back. I'm not feeling sluggish and lethargic like I will the next day. You have a great day, okay? To all of our listeners, please stay tuned. More of the show is on the way.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.